The fluorescent lights in the prison visiting room buzzed like angry wasps, casting harsh shadows across my brother's face as he leaned forward, his voice dripping with the same condescension I'd heard my entire life. "Face it, Marcus. You're never going to amount to anything. Mom and Dad were right about you." I sat there in my orange jumpsuit, handcuffed to the metal table, watching the man who used to be my best friend deliver what he thought was my final judgment. 3 years into a 5-year sentence for a crime I didn't commit, and even my own blood had given up on me. But David didn't know about the contract. None of them did. Hidden in my cell, folded between the pages of a worn copy of The Count of Monte Cristo, how's that for irony, was a piece of paper that would change everything. A document I'd signed in desperation 2 years ago, when hope was nothing but a 4-letter word and my future looked as gray as these concrete walls. My lawyer, Jennifer Chen, had been trying to reach me for weeks. The guards kept forgetting to deliver her messages, probably paid off by someone who wanted me to stay buried. But today, she was finally here, her briefcase clutched tight against her chest, her eyes holding a secret that would shatter my brother's smug certainty. As David stood to leave, throwing one last pitying look over his shoulder, I smiled for the first time in months. Sometimes the best revenge is simply letting people underestimate you until it's too late to stop what's coming. Before the handcuffs, before the trial that became a media circus, before my own family turned their backs on me, I was just a kid from Detroit with big dreams and bigger problems. Growing up in the shadow of my older brother David was like living in permanent eclipse. He was the golden boy, the Harvard graduate, the one who could do no wrong in our parents' eyes. I was the artist, the dreamer, the one who saw beauty in abandoned buildings and possibility in broken things. While David climbed corporate ladders, I chased a different kind of success. I wanted to create something that mattered, something that would outlast the steel and concrete of our dying city. That's how I met Elena Rodriguez, the woman who would become both my salvation and my downfall. She was a documentary filmmaker, passionate about urban renewal and social justice, with eyes that could see straight through to your soul. When she approached me about collaborating on a project about Detroit's rebirth, I thought I'd found my purpose. The project was ambitious, a multimedia installation combining my street art with her film work, telling the stories of families who'd lost everything but refused to give up. We spent months in the abandoned neighborhoods interviewing residents, documenting their struggles, falling in love with their resilience and with each other. But love makes you vulnerable, and vulnerability makes you stupid. When Elena's ex-boyfriend Marcus Thompson, yes, we shared the same first name, another cosmic joke, showed up claiming I'd stolen his identity to secure funding for our project, I thought it was just jealousy. When the FBI raided my apartment and found forged documents with my signature, I realized someone had been playing a much longer game. The trial was a nightmare. My court-appointed lawyer was overworked and underpaid. The evidence was circumstantial but damning. Elena testified for the prosecution, her voice breaking as she claimed I'd manipulated her, used her project to cover my crimes. I was convicted of identity theft and fraud, sentenced to 5 years in federal prison. My family's disappointment was almost worse than the verdict itself. Prison changes you in ways you never expect. The first year, I was angry. At the system, at Elena, at myself for being naive enough to trust the wrong people. I spent my days in the library, reading everything I could get my hands on, trying to understand how my life had gone so wrong so fast. That's where I met Carlos Mendoza, a lifer who'd been wrongfully convicted 20 years earlier. Carlos had something most inmates didn't: hope. He'd been working with the Innocence Project, slowly building a case for his release, teaching himself law from outdated textbooks. "The system's broken, kid," he told me one day as we sat in the yard, watching clouds drift across the razor wire. "But sometimes broken things can be fixed if you know where to look." Carlos introduced me to Jennifer Chen, a young lawyer who specialized in wrongful conviction cases. She was fresh out of law school, idealistic and hungry to make a difference. When she first visited me, I was skeptical. Another lawyer making promises she couldn't keep. But Jennifer was different. She listened, really listened. And when I told her about the contract, the one document I'd managed to hide before my arrest, her eyes lit up with the kind of excitement that comes from finding the missing piece of a puzzle. The contract was something I'd signed 2 years before my arrest, a licensing agreement for a revolutionary water purification technology I'd developed during my brief stint in engineering school. It was supposed to be a small side project, a way to help communities in Detroit access clean water. I'd partnered with a tech startup, signing over the rights in exchange for a percentage of future profits. I'd forgotten about it completely until Carlos mentioned reading about a major breakthrough in water purification technology that was making headlines. The description sounded familiar, too familiar. "Marcus," Jennifer said, her voice barely containing her excitement, "do you have any idea what this technology is worth now?" I didn't, but I was about to find out. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. The water purification technology I'd developed, the one I'd casually signed away for what seemed like pocket change, was now the foundation of a billion-dollar company. Aquatech Solutions had gone public 6 months ago, their stock price soaring as they revolutionized water access in developing countries. And according to the contract Jennifer had finally managed to retrieve from my old apartment, I owned 15% of it. But the money wasn't what kept me awake at night, staring at the concrete ceiling of my cell. It was the timing. The technology had been stolen from me just months before I was framed for identity theft. The same Marcus Thompson who'd accused me of fraud was now listed as Aquatech's chief technology officer. The pieces were falling into place, painting a picture so ugly it made my stomach turn. Someone had orchestrated my downfall, stolen my work, and destroyed my life, all to claim credit for an invention that could change the world. The worst part was realizing how perfectly they'd played me. Elena's documentary project had been the perfect cover, giving them access to my research, my notes, my trust. Her betrayal wasn't just personal. It was professional, calculated, devastating. I found myself torn between rage and heartbreak. The woman I'd loved, the woman I'd planned to marry, had been part of it all along. Every kiss, every whispered promise, every moment of intimacy had been a lie designed to get closer to my work. But there was something else eating at me. Something darker than betrayal. Doubt. What if I was wrong? What if Elena had been as manipulated as I was? What if she was just another victim in someone else's game? Carlos noticed my struggle. "Revenge is a poison you drink hoping someone else dies," he warned me one evening as we played chess in the common area. "But justice is medicine. It heals not just you, but everyone who comes after." I knew he was right. But knowing and feeling are two different things, and my heart was still bleeding from wounds that refused to heal. Jennifer's investigation moved like wildfire through dry grass. Within weeks, she'd uncovered a web of corruption that reached far beyond my case. Marcus Thompson wasn't just a thief. He was part of a sophisticated operation that targeted young inventors, stealing their work through elaborate cons involving fake relationships and manufactured legal troubles. Elena had been his girlfriend for 3 years before she met me. The documentary project was a setup from the beginning, designed to get close to promising young innovators in Detroit's tech scene. I wasn't their first victim, and I wouldn't be their last. But I was the one who'd gotten away with something they needed. The contract I'd signed included a clause that seemed insignificant at the time, a provision that any major modifications to the original technology would require my explicit approval. Thompson and his team had improved my design significantly, making it more efficient and cost-effective. Those improvements were what made Aquatech so valuable, and they were completely illegal without my consent. Jennifer filed an emergency injunction, freezing Aquatech's assets pending a full investigation. The news hit the financial world like a bomb. Stock prices plummeted. Investors panicked. The company that had been worth billions was suddenly worthless paper. That's when my brother David called for his final visit, the one where he'd delivered his crushing verdict about my worthless future. He worked for one of the investment firms that had lost millions when Aquatech collapsed. He'd come to gloat, to kick me while I was down, to make sure I knew how completely I'd failed. He had no idea he was talking to a man who'd just become one of the wealthiest people in Michigan. But the money was just the beginning. Jennifer had uncovered evidence that Thompson's operation had been running for over a decade, stealing innovations worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The FBI was building a case that would bring down an entire network of corporate espionage. And Elena? She'd been arrested 3 days ago, finally ready to testify against the man who'd controlled her life for years. She wanted to see me, Jennifer said. She wanted to explain, to apologize, to try to make things right. I wasn't sure I was ready for that conversation. Some wounds cut too deep for simple apologies to heal. The day Jennifer walked into that visiting room with the contract in her hands, everything changed. Not just my circumstances, but my understanding of who I was and what I was capable of becoming. "Marcus," she said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to reveal. "You're not just wealthy, you're powerful. This technology you created, it's going to provide clean water to over 50 million people in the next 5 years. You didn't just invent something, you created hope." The numbers were staggering. 15% of Aquatech's current valuation put my net worth at over $200 million. But the real value was in the licensing deals, the international contracts, the humanitarian applications that would generate revenue for decades to come. I was rich. Richer than my brother. Richer than my parents. Richer than everyone who'd written me off as a failure. But more importantly, I was vindicated. The FBI had moved fast once Jennifer provided them with the evidence. Marcus Thompson was arrested at his penthouse office, led away in handcuffs while news cameras rolled. The irony wasn't lost on me. He was wearing an orange jumpsuit now, sitting in a cell just like the one I'd called home for 3 years. Elena's testimony had been devastating. She'd revealed the full scope of the operation, naming names, providing evidence, detailing how young inventors across the country had been targeted and destroyed. Her cooperation had earned her a reduced sentence, but she'd still spend the next 2 years in federal prison. When she finally came to see me, 2 days before my release, I barely recognized her. The confident, passionate filmmaker I'd fallen in love with was gone, replaced by a broken woman carrying the weight of her choices. "I loved you," she said, tears streaming down her face. "That wasn't part of the plan. I wasn't supposed to fall in love with you. But I did, and it destroyed everything. I wanted to hate her. I'd spent 3 years nurturing that hatred, feeding it, letting it grow until it consumed everything else. But sitting across from her, seeing the genuine remorse in her eyes, I felt something unexpected. Pity. The documentary was real," she continued. "My feelings for you were real. I tried to back out, tried to warn you, but Marcus, he had things on me, threatened people I cared about. I was trapped." "We were both trapped," I said finally. "But we're not anymore." The conversation lasted 2 hours. We talked about the project we'd worked on together, the families we'd interviewed, the dreams we'd shared before everything fell apart. We talked about forgiveness, about second chances, about the possibility of redemption. When she left, I knew I'd never see her again. Some chapters in your life are meant to close completely, no matter how much you might want to rewrite the ending. But as I sat in my cell that night, reading the contract one last time before my release, I realized something profound. I wasn't the same man who'd been arrested 3 years ago. Prison hadn't broken me. It had forged me into something stronger, something better. Tomorrow I would walk out of here not as a convicted felon, but as a man with the power to change the world. The morning of my release, David was waiting outside the prison gates. Not to apologize, that would come later, but because Jennifer had called him, explained everything, and he'd realized the magnitude of his mistake. "I'm sorry," he said, as I walked toward the black sedan Jennifer had sent for me. "I'm so sorry, Marcus. I should have believed in you." I looked at my brother, this man who'd spent our entire lives convinced of his own superiority, and felt something I hadn't expected. Compassion. "You believed what you were told to believe," I said. "We all did." The ride to Jennifer's office was surreal. 3 years of concrete walls and steel bars, and suddenly, I was looking at a world that had moved on without me. But I hadn't been left behind. I'd been preparing for this moment without even knowing it. Aquatech's board had voted unanimously to offer me the position of Chief Innovation Officer, with full control over the humanitarian applications of my technology. The company would be rebuilt from the ground up, with transparency and ethics as its foundation. But my first call wasn't to Aquatech. It was to Carlos, still sitting in his cell, still fighting for his freedom after 20 years. "The Innocence Project is about to get a very large donation," I told him, "and a very determined new board member." 6 months later, I stood in a village in Kenya, watching children drink clean water from a well powered by my technology. Elena was there too. She'd been released early for her cooperation and was documenting the project for a new film about redemption and second chances. We weren't together. That bridge had been burned too completely to rebuild. But we were both there, both part of something bigger than our mistakes, both proof that people can change. My brother called that evening as I watched the African sunset paint the sky in impossible colors. "Mom and Dad want to have dinner when you get back," he said. They want to apologize properly. Tell them I'll be there, I said. Family is family, even when it's complicated. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. Sometimes it's simply becoming everything they said you'd never be. If this story moved you, if you've ever been underestimated or written off by the people who should have believed in you most, remember this. Your worth isn't determined by other people's expectations. Your potential isn't limited by their imagination. Subscribe and share this story with someone who needs to hear it today, because there are dreamers out there who've been told they'll never amount to anything, and stories like this might just remind them that the best chapters are often written after everyone else has given up on you. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is prove them wrong by becoming exactly who you were meant to be.